What? What is a threat?
Yeah.
A threat. Morning. We're back. We've been on a little bit. I've been. Kind of took the summer off here, but this is Business Technicalities. I'm Jason Slager with CWR, and I have a special guest today who's there. Give your name.
I'm Matt Lee. So Cyber Matt Lee, as it says down in the bottom.
It does say Cyber Matt Lee, and we're on the wrong sides. I should have
reversed that. Yeah, that works out.
It's fine.
People get us confused all the time, so it does tend to work out as it sits.
So Matt's in town here. We're working on a couple projects together. I can't really talk a lot about what they are, but I wanted to. Hopefully, I do have audio here. I see audio there. I see audio there, I think.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's okay.
We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, somebody will call it out if we don't have audio. We got to be relatively brief this morning. He has a 10:30, but we started talking last night. He was over at the house. We were working on one of our projects, and we somehow got onto this topic of your break glass accounts.
Yeah.
And then we started talking about passwordless. And as I sat in bed last night and got up this morning, my immediate thought is, man, like, these are threat modeling problems, and this is something we've not covered on Business Technicalities before, and I thought we could talk about it.
Sure. When you think about what we're talking about is like, I went to hyperbole by making a break glass account that had 3 distributed drives and had 3 distributed sets of keys to actually manage those drives, and then 3 distributed sets of envelopes with keys to each individual service and password access for a 1% problem. And in the obverse, Jason wasn't a big fan of passwordless because of the single device attack vector, meaning if I have your dead face and your phone, I have the ability to start a web browser session, gain a token, authorize that token, give someone the ability to steal it. And so the both of us were working on the 1% problem over the 90% good.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a threat modeling problem, as you say. Like, we have to make these decisions every day. Do we make them based on actual threats, or do we make them based on something we're comfortable doing?
Well, and there's an internal perceived notion here, right? It's like for all of my life, right? Like, I'm in this field for 30-ish years now, right? Like, if you count when I was just a hobby to me, you've always had passwords, right?
Yeah.
And so I wasn't necessarily fighting passwordless because I was fighting for the password. I was fighting passwordless because, to me, this is a cross sector of something you know and something you have. And when you go to passwordless, you remove the something you know, but you don't, right? And that was the discussion that we happened into last night. Is the something you know just comes from the TPM instead of your brain?
Yeah. Well, and also in a weird way, the something you know comes in something you momentarily know, like your passwordless now with a number matching.
Yeah.
Right. So it just means you still know something. It's only something your eyes should see.
Yeah.
But yeah, to the point, it is shifting from a traditional authentication model that we have used, which is something you know, something you are, something you have, and something you are, to now saying, well, the things that I have and know are maybe combined in one unit of access, right? And so that is the reason to say this doesn't make sense. But when you do the threat modeling of it, the business value of what it brings is extremely, extremely high. Yeah. Right? Like, it's faster. In fact, I'll take this since this is Business Technicalities. I was at a engineering airlift with Microsoft, and they brought in the Starbucks CISO to do a tabletop with like 60 of us. And one of the things he talked about was when they went to go passwordless, he didn't win on the value of security. It's FIDO, it's harder to phish, there's all kinds of things, right? He won on the fact that they could just walk up with their card, plug it into the side of the machine, and serve coffee 30 seconds faster on average than someone typing a password and responding to an MFA prompt, and that it was more secure. But he didn't win on that. He won on the 15,000 stores selling more cups of coffee.
I mean, if you can win on the ROI of it, then this is a win-win, right? Like, so many times MFA, right? Like, people hate it. They just don't like it. We have customers that are like, we don't allow our employees to have their phones on the floor, right? We use YubiKeys in that case, right? I have one here. I still think in my case that I prefer this to passwordless phone app because if I find a phone, there's a good chance with a little bit of work, I can determine who it might belong to. So I could
especially if they've left it open, as I do. I lock it up, follow it online, right? The hashtag lock it up. People leave devices open all the time.
So there's a good like high likelihood I can figure out what account it could belong to and act on it. If I find a YubiKey in the street or in the bar, like it's now I have a credential with no possible like link to the human that
and a self-burning credential, right? Because if you miss the pin a number of times, which is something and still maintain, then it will self-shred. It self-destructs. Not as cool as Mission Impossible style, but it still will self-destruct. And then you'll have no credential use. Although it doesn't remove it, it just doesn't allow use of it. But still, those are a way to do that. And what you think about is, and maybe when we bring it back to threat modeling in this conversation, you have to protect the right things. And I think that's something you wanted to cover.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is threat modeling? Why do we care about it, right? Like as business owners, one of the biggest things you have to do in the business is you have to mitigate risk, right? It is one of the core things that a leader
have to choose what to do with risk.
Well, you have to mitigate
and sometimes take risk for purposes of making money.
Accepting it is mitigating it, right? Fair. It's like you basically I have to accept I have to have a plan for every amount of risk. And you know what? Like a lot of small business owners putting their head in the sand is how they choose to mitigate that risk, right? Like
the dumpster fire meme
we're just going to pretend it doesn't exist until it like that. From a business perspective, that's actually a whole different thing, right? Like telling the client, making the client understand that risk exists, whether or not they deal with it, is actually huge, right? Like, but at the same time, I feel like as MSPs, we often do a bad job. Oh, and we might fight on this one a little bit.
Okay. All right.
Of aligning the risk versus the spend.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right. So,
but a lot of that's come on the cost of ignorance.
Oh yeah.
I think a lot of that comes of just, I don't understand it. And so the first time somebody says something like this to me, it makes sense. Right?
If you can't threat model, then you have to protect against everything, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't know what's likely.
Threat modeling adjusts. So if you think about just risk analysis, there's quantitative and qualitative. I won't bore you with the quantitative aspect, but it tries to get to the actual dollar value of things. Whereas qualitative is really just likelihood times impact.
Yep.
Right. And when you start to figure that one out, what we're really digging into is the likelihood side.
Yeah.
Right. And so, it's right there in the notes we needed to cover. Well, there you go. Check that one off there, Slagle. But likelihood times impact, right? Because in this case, the impact is about the same. Like if someone gains compromised access to my accounts, then the BECs, the lost in business email compromise, the ransomwares, double extortion, those things will have their cost. But the likelihood is what we're talking about. Like, really, is it likely that someone is going to come and grab your phone in the attempt to get you? And what we came to is, sure, in a nation state model at a certain level, but not in my normal likelihood. So let's give it a big old 1 or so, or 0 or 0.5.
In Toledo, Ohio, no one is robbing me by gunpoint to get into my 365 account.
It's fair.
Like,
it's coming, but it's not here yet. In fact,
right?
if there's a new business model, I'll take the VIG. No, I tease. I love that comment right there. Some people think my business is too low value to be a target. So let's do the likelihood times impact aspect of this. So when we talk about likelihood on this for that conversation, which Allison, like 100%, we talk about the likelihood of this. When you understand that a average Russian citizen earns about $14,000 a year, and they know that they can at least get a ransom of 30 grand from you, that's a year. That's a year. And so when you talk about this too small and too low value is already broken there. So we know the likelihood's higher because the people that are attacking us already know that there's value beyond their level of what's valuable. But then the too small. And I like to do this on stage, but I ask people in the audience, do any of you have children? And everybody's like, of course, you stupid. Yeah, we got children, right? Like, except for when I was talking to the 8th grade once, but that still surprised me. I tease. But, so I ask, how many of you have children? Okay, are any of your children like especially amazing at anything? Are they the top in their field? Are they number one? Are they president of the United States? Are they any of those things? Like, answer that. And when they say no, I said, let me ask you this. If I kidnapped your child, would you pay to get him back or her back? Absolutely. Great. It only has to be valuable to you to be worth something to attack. And that's how extortion and ransomware works. It takes advantage of things being valuable to you. So that likelihood is high of people attacking me. Even if I'm a small business, I'd have to put a 4 or 5 in my likelihood of somebody opportunistically targeting.
But the other side of that, though, is that these are business models with margins and ROIs, right? So
100% business technicalities.
Right. And if you assume that the threat actors aren't running ROI and don't have supply chain, right? There's initial access brokers that are taking a cut of this. There's the people that are using the clean and launder the money that are taking the cut of this, right? Like, so they have costs. And a lot of what we do threat modeling
Great
wise
call.
is aligning the reward with the amount of effort it's going to take for them to do it, right? So you have a line, it's probably not linear, right? But there's a mathematical function we can use for the payout of a thing
And
to a
we're
threat
doing
actor.
it right now.
Yeah, and you just need to keep yourself above it, right?
Well,
like
in hackening, we're doing it right now.
Yeah.
We have 57 that have signed up, 27 or 28-ish that have signed our legal agreement. And of those 28, we're picking the ones we think we can pwn for the least cost.
6 on the board over there right now.
We picked out 6 that we think we'll be able to get some wins in with least amount of effort. We have limited time, unlimited need to get these done, and more to come on that. But the point is, I'm picking the ones that have maybe haven't given themselves longer last names and first names, right? If you use your first initial and last name of for your email address, that's only 130,000 combinations for me to get a good bell curve of things. But if I had first name dot last name, I don't even touch the surface at 5 million scanning, right?
We hit the surface pretty well. We think we have a good amount of them.
We've gotten 239 500ths of one company we're looking at.
Yeah.
So maybe
with 2 million.
Yeah. So it's a 40-50% efficacy at that space. And then also Allison goes on to say, if they can't squeeze you for money, they can abuse your systems. That goes into the impact aspect, more impact of now slower systems, other things of that nature.
In BEC, that's almost always what they do first.
100%.
Right? They try to get other victims.
Well, and this one might be alluding to because of the first comment around CPU type exhaustion for like Bitcoin mining. But either way, you're right. All the things.
I have a good example for the risk times likelihood. We have a big industrial client, and the big industrial client runs, they move molten metal around.
Okay.
And they have a Linux machine that interfaces with the PLCs, calculates some data, and sends data back to the PLCs to optimize that process.
Sure.
To optimize the process. The system in question was running Red Hat 4 well past Red Hat 4 dying.
Sure.
Right? Red Hat 6 was getting ready to EOL, and this thing's still running Red Hat 4. And so I talked to the people in charge of it, and I said, we need to upgrade this. Well, the code doesn't work. The code needs a ton of testing. It's written in Fortran, and I haven't been able to get Fortran to work on modern Linux. And it's behind 2 firewalls, right? So it's we have a firewall on the edge, and then we have a firewall between the edge and the OT network, right? Because this is OT, not IT. This is OT. And the exact conversation I had was this, right? The likelihood is low.
Yeah, but the impact
is possible death.
Yeah. And
literally
massive.
You could
fire, burn down the building, all kinds of things.
Kyle Hansloven showed a video the other day of a Russian threat actor that apparently got into a water tower somewhere in Connecticut, I think, and they emptied it, right? Yep. And so the likelihood of that happening is relatively, probably not as low as it should be. Yeah.
No. Stay tuned.
The impact, they could control the chlorinators.
Yeah.
The impact is huge.
And we've already seen that happen, right? In Tampa 3 years ago or so. It turned out to be a bit of an insider, but the point is that people start to understand this connectivity. So the impact's massive, but the hopeful steps you took to mitigate by multiple firewalls, segmentation, network aspects, those things are part of it. But you do have to at least do this modeling and understand what are my threats. And Jeff Mann, I wouldn't do right if I didn't mention him, but Jeff Mann and I sat down at RSA one day and we walked around all day just reading what vendors had on their stuff. And we did a whole show talking about how they don't even understand the term. So when we say threat, a threat is active and kinetic, right?
Yeah.
Like a threat is I have a vulnerability. I am allergic to bullets. They have problems.
And wheat.
Yeah, and wheat. Don't say it out loud. And wheat. But that said, if a bullet comes in contact with me, that is now a threat, right?
Yeah.
The vulnerability is me being weak to that. The threat is that. What can I do to mitigate? Body armor. I can do things that take that away. And so we have to talk about, do we just take the risk and say, well, nobody's probably shooting me today in downtown Toledo, right? Or do I wear the body armor? Well, that's probably not a high likelihood. Therefore, my impact would be great, but my likelihood is extremely low in day to day.
And as humans, we're really bad at judging this.
We sure are. We have confirmation and positive outcome bias. We love to think we're going to win the lottery 1 in 12 billion.
Well, and the number of people that won't fly.
Yeah.
But will drive happily.
When the math is completely the opposite. You're much more likely to die in a car accident.
Per billion miles traveled, I think there's something like 80 deaths in a car and 0.005 in a plane, right?
Yeah. It's really low.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, bicycles are 3 times more dangerous than cars.
Ask me how I know. I mean,
yeah.
At least if you're surfing behind another one.
But motorcycles are 4 times more dangerous than bicycles.
Yeah, and I ride those too.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm bad at risk is what we just discussed.
But, so we're humans were bad at this, right? So how do we do it, right? Like I think the first thing you have to realize here is that this is not a technical discussion at all.
Sure.
Right. Like this is
other than figuring out what those numbers are and coming up to that calculatively, 100%. You're right. Yeah.
This is a business discussion though, right? Like you're not going to put like the super nerds in a room unless the super nerds are economists.
I'll refer you back to my break glass account methodology
and have them do this, right? Like this is a discussion that you need to be having with business owners and internally, right? It's like, and you need to look at what are the likely ways that I'm going to be attacked, right? And in a cyber aspect these days, right, it's like unpatched systems, right? Like lack of MFA, credential
poorly
misuse,
constructed
right? Like,
conditional access policies.
Bad conditional access policies.
Letting maybe a business executive win to get something out of maybe just what they thought, not necessarily what could come out. Like there's all kinds of things that
he may be poking a little about the password list thing.
It's just a smidge. I already poked at my own own break glass methodologies.
But you need to look at like what things are actually likely to happen, right? And spend your effort and time protecting against them, right? Like there's a 100%. Lot of wins that you can get just by eliminating local admin access, right? Like from a threat model. Huge. From a threat modeling perspective, if somebody has local admin access, we now have there's a high likelihood that a human at some point will get popped.
Yep. And when I do, I win.
Just super multiplied the risk or the impact out if you have local admin access.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So like you basically, if you take the local admin away, the impact goes way down, right?
And likelihood of a lot of other vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
Right. Like now I have, without getting super nerdy, now that I've landed with local admin, I can do things like Responder and do other attacks against other machines that I wouldn't have had and wouldn't have been a high likelihood if it wasn't for this aspect. Right. So like they are chain independent. But to your point, if you can make simple decisions on what those high likelihoods are, you can reduce a lot of other things too by those choices.
Yes. And this is fluid. It's very fluid, right? Like right now, right, one of the big things we're dealing with we have a good amount of manufacturing clients. And one of the big things we're really pushing for all of them is fund transfer policies, right?
Yeah.
Because we're seeing right now a huge amount of, not even them, right? It's their vendor of theirs gets an email account compromised.
One of the worst BECs I ever saw was an A, B squared, C cubed one, where someone attacked vendor A, which is not my client. And they were a grain manufacturer in the middle in vendor B that took grain in from overseas. And they got into their systems, made an ACH change for $500,000 here and lost $500,000 to them. They then called and said, well, we're not shipping you your grain if you don't pay the extra $500,000. Sorry, it's on you. So they paid the $500,000. So out $1 million, $500,000 extra in cash flow. Then they came and attacked company B because they knew who those parties were. And so they then fished them in a phishing way that took the credential, even though they had MFA, and then they did all B squareds and all C cubed. So C cubed didn't send 900,000. One of their downstreams didn't send them 900,000. So they're out 1.4 million or so, or 1.9 million or so in cash flow in a 3-day period, and it cost the threat actor $30. We see this a lot, actually. We get a lot of like, this person is saying I didn't pay them, and we know we paid them. And then when we start, they think we're compromised. And when I start digging into it, like we pull the archive logs, we pull audit shit, like we pull everything, and we're like, no, you got this email from them, right? Like this legitimately came from their Microsoft tenant, right? So somebody is in the other side's Microsoft tenant doing that, right? And so that's a high impact, high likelihood thing right now, right? So it's an area where we've been spending focus and time with customers. And when you break that down, though, you have to trust those people that are educating in your world to say, okay, Jason, how should I do these things? Well, we're going to have this annoying thing. It's going to come up on your phone. You have to type in a number. You're going to have to do it more often, too, because we're going to do this like a little bit faster, because that way people can't harvest that. And also I'll say, if you're any business people here listening, and I'm in the technical world, one of the biggest challenges that we have to overcome as a globe, not just as the United States, if anybody's anywhere else internationally, is that there's no other profession where Jason has to educate you to have you make a decision in a professional space. Like if your attorney did this, you'd be like, no. I need you to explain me the origins of Anglican structure law. And then can you explain to me precedent base? And then once you're done with that, no, like
I blame PC makers of the 90s to 2010s of this.
Oh, there's actually a person to blame?
Yeah, I think so. Right. We commoditized everyone and basically turned computer systems into toasters, right?
Fair.
Like, so that we normalized the fact that something happened to your computer, you just bought another one, right? We don't treat them like cars that require regular service and regular maintenance.
Well, even then, cars have mechanics that can just go through some ASE certification through their place. We don't have anything. Right. And same thing, if you want to be an airplane mechanic, there's a very clear and present methodology to get there.
If you want to be an electrician.
Yeah, same thing. But if you want to be a MSP, the biggest post I've ever done was a sticky note on a piece of glass out in front of the bay. And it said MSP. And I said, now I'm an MSP. Right. And the problem is that we have this challenge where as business owners, and I'll go back to the point, if I wanted to explain to you the difference between this type of conditional access methodology for the front end of your identity and this one, I have to explain OAuth and how OAuth can be harvested and how a man-in-the-middle attack works and how that, like all of those things aren't something you want to learn. And yet in order to understand the risk, likelihood, and the impact based on those decisions, you either have to find someone you can trust in a sea full of people that may or may not know what they're talking about, and then make risk-based decisions. So all I would say is, to sum this up, if you're at least looking at it in some qualitative risk-based method of what's my likelihood, what's the impact, it's easier to translate those, right? Like to somebody in a business shoes.
Yep. And these are discussions that you should be internally having about your own risk as an MSP because your risk is big. You are a juicy target. And these are discussions that you should be having with all your clients during TBRs and other things. So,
and they have correlations. I'll actually have just a few minutes for one more. So I had a concrete, and I love using this concrete manufacturer. They did concrete for all the roads in a Midwestern state, like literally the whole thing, nuts. And I asked him one day, what makes you money? And I said, Ron, what makes you money? And he said, Matt, a dump truck or a concrete truck showing up every 30 minutes at a job site with the proper mix of ash, cement, water, aggregate to meet the right stress and pressure loads at the right temperature every day. So what goes into that? What happens if a trucker's down? Oh, I got 2 more waiting in the wings that I can bring out that'll do the overtime. All right, what happens if a truck is broken? Oh, no worries. We have an extra truck. What if 3 are broken? We actually have a shop and our own mechanics and burst load. Okay, great. What about a different app? We have another ash plant and an agreement with this going through over here. Okay, so they understand risk and resiliency. We are trying to then translate the other part of their systems. And I said to him, hey, Ron, what happens if Trimble all tracks down and you don't know where your trucks are? How often have you actually practiced your manual radio-based methodology of tracking all these trucks? Okay, what about resiliency there?
Delta, perfect example of that.
100%. Yes, literally.
How many times have you practiced scheduling your flight crews by hand?
Or United when the system itself couldn't process the changes enough.
Well, that was Delta too. That's why Delta broke after
the CrowdStrike thing.
Yeah.
So the point is that we just need to be better at, for you business people and for you technical people here listening, at explaining things in ways that they can translate it to the other business risks they're already good at dealing with. They don't understand all the mechanics. They have good mechanics. They tell them whenever things are a problem. They don't understand, right? We just have to cross that barrier of being professionals. So, 100%. All right, don't know how we shifted from a threat modeling conversation to
but it's the same conversation. It is that conversation, right? Threat modeling is all about that and understanding those risks and telling the customer, right? Like I didn't tell the story at the beginning, but we had a law firm that wouldn't move to 365 because they were afraid Microsoft was going to read their email. Microsoft doesn't care about reading your email. And by the way, you use Outlook. So if Microsoft really wanted to read your email, they have like at least one other way, if not more other ways they could do that, right? Like, but the likelihood that your on-site Exchange server is going to get popped is way more likely than Microsoft reading your email, right?
As proven in 2021 and 2022 compendiums, right? So proxy log on, proxy shell, proxy not.
That's it. We're going to let Matt scoot off to his meeting here, and we're going to get back to our projects that we only talked a little bit about here. We'll talk about them tomorrow on
our show, The Game. It's going to be awesome, 2 p.m. Mountain.
And we'll talk to you later. Have a great week. This was Business Technicalities. See ya.